Hello and welcome to Setting the Scene. I'm your host David. Now in this board build I haven't done a lot to the board, so you may remember the last game between myself and Oliver. It was militia versus my Thalax army, or a very small version of it. And we were playing in kind of like the wild lands of this rocky outcrop. So essentially I've kept the board pretty much the same as it was. All I've done is I've just shifted those rocks forward, into the two rocks in the foreground, and I've shifted some rocks at the back here ever so slightly, and the major thing I've done is I've added an additional massive piece of rock here. The reason why I've done that is because I wanted a little bit of height and a little bit of drama to the board that was all natural, rather than sort of using the towers and the Necromunda gantries and various bits and bobs. And I also wanted something for the models to go under. It's very rare that you see that. Sometimes you'll get a city board where there's kind of like a walkway maybe, or sometimes you'll see a bridge in battle reports. You don't see that many bridges. I would love to get a bridge on the channel. Lots of things I'd love to do, but I'd love to get a bridge on the channel because I think that presents a very unique a unique game where you've got two armies on one side, each side rather, and then you're fighting for this. You're fighting for the ground on the bridge, which would be really, really interesting. Now, I know the two gents coming tomorrow. We've got Joshua and John, nearly forgot his name. And it's Alpha Legion versus Ultramarine. So it'll be blue on blue, or shiny blue on matte blue, I guess. And a lot of it is infantry. There's a couple of vehicles in there, but the majority of it is infantry. So it's going to be really interesting because, you know, infantry moving around this landscape is really interesting, because unless you've got that clear path through, you've got to scramble over rocks or get to a high position. And I really love the idea, as I said before, about an arch. You don't see arches very often. I think it'd be really cool when we get some photos of a rhino with some troops, or a contemptor, or 20-man tack squad just kind of flooding underneath the bridge there, or on sort of this land formation. So board build, super simple, not a lot to it. Shifted some rocks around, stuck a big one on top, and then I just put a load of this aquarium aggregate down, rubbed it into the areas, and then where the rocks were that I propped it up with some slate. I've just filled it with this smaller crushed slate, and then kind of backfilled it then with the aggregate, and that kind of, you can't see all of the filling elements in here that I've done. So that's good news. Kept the board build nice and simple. I could have actually done with another bag of this stuff. It's a little bit thin in areas, mainly because I had to pack it up around rocks to make it look a little bit more kind of natural. There is one thing I'd like to share with you though. I noticed when I was building the board, a lot of these slate pieces, they just got everywhere after the game between Oliver and I. So the stuff just gets moved around and knocked and whatever else, and a lot of this aggregate, a lot of the slate starts moving into the center of the path, or of the kind of the path left by the natural formation of the rock. And over here in particular, which I'll show you in a second, I'll move the camera in a minute, it's really busy, and I wanted it quite fresh, quite virgin desert. I didn't want it to be as if the Marines or anybody's been there before, so I wanted it to be quite virgin. So this is where my homemade sieve comes in handy. So instead of, peeling all of the aggregate off, putting the rocks on, then putting the aggregate back on after sieving it, I'm just going to sieve it in places where I want it to be a bit more virgin and not disturbed. So I'll move the camera and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So as you can see here, there's a lot of this slate mixed in with the aggregate, and that looks fine, looks great, but it does look a little bit busy, and it just looks like you've just thrown the two together, which is not what we want. We want it to look a little bit more manicured. We want it to look a little bit more natural, rather than just two aggregate substances thrown together. So this is where our sieve comes in handy. It is literally just a Tupperware container from the supermarket, and I think these are 10mm holes, and I've just drilled them in with a drill multiple times, and that helps to sieve out, helps to separate out the aggregate from the fine the fine aggregate from the slate. what we do then, just to clear these areas up, I just scoop the majority of it up just like that, because we want aggregate around the sides of the rock, because you know this rock is constantly being peeled off and eroded away by the sand and everything else, and we want the aggregate to be mainly against the rock side and not in the middle, because as I said, we're trying to represent fresh ground. So all we do is we're just sieving it out, and as you can see, all that middle ground now is just perfectly smooth. There is a few of the very, very fine chips in there, but certainly not any of this big stuff, which is what we want. And so now that looks a lot smoother, much nicer. And then we're going to go back in with our larger chips at the edges to kind of represent this rock falling down. But that looks a bit too wild. So all we do is we just pick up some of the fresh stuff, or we sort of massage it into the rock formation, and it helps just cover it up, and it gives us a suggestion. And we'll do the same that side. You know, this isn't hard. I mean, it's child's play, really, isn't it? You just with a big sand pit, really. You know, and that looks 10 times better. And we've still got a load of slate left over. I'm just going to do the same again, just in this area. There's not actually that much to tidy up, but I just want to give it a quick clean. Perfect. So we're just going to shake all that lovely new desert sand out, I guess. I don't want to call it sand because it's not sand, and I don't want to put anyone off by thinking I use sand on the channel, because I don't want you to think, oh, if you use sand, I don't want to bring my models on the channel and I get sand all over them, because sand is abrasive, and sand will damage your models. And to be fair, in the past I have used sand, but I stopped using it, not because it caused any damage to anyone's models, but it was just so fine. It got into absolutely everything, and it was just an absolute nightmare to clean up. Whereas this stuff, because it's a lot bigger, it's so much easier to clean up, which just makes it a bit easier to use. So you can see there that tidied that area up beautifully. And then just a tiny bit here in the foreground. I just want to tidy up this little section here. So we'll just scoop it out, stick it in my tray. It doesn't matter if we catch some stuff on the edges, because we can always put it back. And then we'll just sieve it over nicely. So all that lovely, clean, yellow aggregate there. We'll go back in with some rock. Keep it more localized to the edge of the board. Massage it in a little bit, blend it in a bit, and that is us done for that side. Looks really good. The only other thing I'm going to have a quick look at is just this section here. You know, in an ideal world, this would kind of slope down and be a bit more natural. I appreciate it does look in places like stuff stacked on stuff, but we can get around that a little bit, at least, by, if I just push all this away, I'll try and make it look a little bit more natural. So what we'll do is we'll just pack out this entire side with some of the slate pieces. I've got loads, so if we need more, we can. And then we just come back in, and it does help just kind of form it a little bit more. It's not perfect, granted, but it does help a little bit. We'll try and keep that localized as well a little bit. So I know it's not perfect, as I say, but it does work to some degree. And then we'll just keep fiddling, make sure we're happy with all of the aggregate and how it works. I think if I had another bag, it would just make some of these much larger steps just a little bit more seamless. But the problem is, if you pour a lot of aggregate on here, you've got to have loads for it to cascade down, which will just make that look a little bit nicer rather than having it look stepped. But the advantage to having it stepped is because if you're using models, you know, that's okay to walk up. That's what, a 2-inch gap. So move through cover 2 inches, get up, and then another move through cover 2 inches. And and although this is a really nice elevated position, it's not going to be too commanding, because if you've got a squad on here, you've probably got that side covered, but you haven't got the other side covered. So if you do gain the highest ground, you've got to think, you know, where do you want your troops? Where do you want your 20 bolters firing down? Do you want that side or that side? Or do you put the squad spread over the top, so you've got options to shoot half that side and half that side? Because remember, the game is all about line of sight, true line of sight. So that'll force the players to make some really interesting decisions. That is pretty much the board. I have fought really hard internally to not put any crates, any cranes, any silos, defense lines, bunkers, bastions, you name it. I'm not putting anything down on this board. And the reason why is because tomorrow, I think we're paying 3,250 points, and a lot of it is really infantry heavy. So there's going to be a lot of infantry on the board, and if I now start filling it up with terrain, or standard terrain, I guess you'll call it, it will make the board look really cluttered. And this board is all about the natural relief of the land, because let's not forget, you know, these Marines, they went to planets all over the place, and some were barren, some were populated. You know, they could be traveling from one place to another, and they will come across areas which haven't seen inhabitants for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, and this is just a very small snapshot of that particular scenario. And I think it'd be really interesting with all that infantry on the board, you know, who's going to go for the high ground. You could easily take refuge behind some of these rocks in the foreground to get away from shooting, and then make your move, come over the top of the rock formation there, fire up onto the high position. You know, it's going to be really, really interesting. And I've said it in every single video I've built, pretty much, I've filmed rather, you know, the battlefield is the third army on the board. And if you're playing at home or in a club, you've got 4 buildings and 2 crates, then that is not enough terrain. And one thing I love about the boards on the channels is that it is really high populated board with terrain. And you know, if you've got 10 las cannons and you can get a shot off every single turn, then there's not enough terrain on the board. And I really hope that the channel demonstrates that, you know, lots of terrain is a really close game, because if you're losing half your vehicles in the first 2 or 3 turns, or first and second turn, from shooting from your opponent, and you're a close combat army, you're not going to make close combat. And so the boards that I build, they don't necessarily favour close combat, and they don't necessarily favour shooting. It's all about the players and how they deploy. I think maybe in the past we've got it wrong a few times, maybe, but you know, I think generally the boards are pretty well balanced, and it then comes down to good old-fashioned tactics rather than I'll just bring lots of guns and shoot my enemy off the board. So, because that's no fun for anyone. I think John and Josh have got a very difficult game ahead of them tomorrow. They have got to best the Badlands as much as possible, gain the high ground, and rain bolter shell down upon their enemy. I'm really looking forward to this matchup between John and Josh. I think they're going to have to work really hard to beat the Badlands and come out victorious on the other side. So I really hope you've enjoyed this. I'll pop up some photos just after I've finished talking at the end there, so you can see the board and the line of sight, and you can see through this lovely arch which we've built, which is quite unique. And thanks for watching. Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you've got to say about this board, and I really hope you enjoy the battle report which will follow this. Thanks very much.